But so they create these entities that then immediately start down this pathway of continued growth and increased efficiency and increased productivity, which essentially means more stuff, more control of resources, less people, right? It's not just like make the labor more efficient so people can, work a 40-hour work week. It's just like need less and less people. This is the whole process of using technology to bring in machines right? And then ultimately those entities, which were artificial intelligences, now try and create the ultimate artificial intelligence in which you need no people.
I found that ideas were weapons and were even more effective than bullets.
As one who knows that another war could utterly destroy this civilization, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight.
The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war.
The contest in Vietnam is part of a wider pattern of aggressive purposes.
We force young black men and young white men to fight and kill in brutal solidarity. Yet when they come back home, they can't hardly live on the same block.
The white liberal differs from the white conservative only in one way. The white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon in this political football game.
If you want to understand the way some system works, you look at its institutional structure.
Welcome to Ambiology. I'm Steve Ordower. Throughout the first 2 episodes of Ambiology, we've been exploring an idea that can feel unsettling at first. What if the political reality we've inherited, this left versus right framework that dominates our culture, is not nearly as stable or coherent as we've been taught to believe? What if many of the divisions that consume us are at least in part manufactured? In episode 1, we introduced the idea that the left-right spectrum may function more like a mythology than a timeless truth. Then in episode 2 with Dr. Verlin Lewis, we explored how these political identities constantly shift over time while still somehow maintaining our emotional loyalty. And in this episode, we go even deeper. Because once you begin questioning the mythology, another question emerges. If the left-right divide is not the full story, then what is shaping society underneath it? Today's episode centers around a document written in 1889 called The Gospel of Wealth by industrialist Andrew Carnegie. At first glance, it presents itself as a moral philosophy, an argument that the ultra-wealthy have a responsibility to use their fortunes for the good of society. But beneath that surface lies something much larger, a justification, a rationalization, a moral framework, and possibly even a blueprint for the rise of concentrated corporate power in America. And as this episode unfolds, we'll explore pivotal moments in history that accelerated that transformation, including Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, a case widely associated with the emergence of corporate personhood in the United States in 1886, just 3 years before the Gospel of Wealth was written. And once you begin tracing the ripple effects of that philosophy through history, you start seeing patterns everywhere, in media, in healthcare, in labor, in politics, in education, even in the way we think about progress itself. However, this conversation is not about demonizing success, wealth, innovation, or technology. It's about asking difficult questions, questions about incentives, questions about power, questions about institutions that may no longer primarily serve human beings, but instead serve systems designed for perpetual growth, efficiency, and control. And perhaps most importantly, What happens when human beings begin organizing their entire civilization around entities whose primary legal obligation is not human flourishing, but profit maximization? At the center of the modern corporation is a fiduciary obligation to shareholders, a built-in expectation that the company's primary responsibility is to maximize profit and increase shareholder value, even when those incentives conflict with the broader well-being of society. This episode is exploratory. It's philosophical, at times speculative, but it's also deeply rooted in history. And whether you ultimately agree with us or not, our hope is that these conversations encourage something increasingly rare in modern culture: the willingness to step outside inherited narratives and axioms and to think in ways that are less constrained by the conditioning that shapes so much of our public discourse. And before we begin, I'd like to define a word that has come up several times throughout the first 2 episodes of Ambiology: axiom. An axiom is a foundational statement, principle, or assumption that is accepted as true without requiring proof. Much of what we explore in Ambiology involves confronting, dissecting, and shining a light on the axiomatic beliefs that shape our perceptions, often in ways we don't even consciously recognize. This is Ambiology, Episode 3, Gospel of Wealth.
We have a group of individuals who really had a very dehumanizing approach to their economic pursuit, right? They saw other people as kind of fodder, as cogs for their factory. If they got out of line, it was like, beat them or just do whatever. It was like kind of malfunctioning machinery,
Yeah.
And the Gospel of Wealth even kind of admits that, like, the modern owner, which is them, doesn't have the capacity to actually engage in kind of a normal, human, compassionate way with the people under his employ, because there's just too many of them, But it's also just their approach from the beginning. Rockefeller and Carnegie has been specifically to kind of reduce everything to the ledger, to squeeze every penny out of everything, and to, whenever possible, pit people against each other or do whatever was necessary in order to just win, win. And then they create entities that have a legal fiduciary responsibility to do only that: win at all costs.
Which is what a corporate structure has a fiduciary responsibility to do that, to maximize profit.
Yeah, a CEO who doesn't do that will be removed by the board for violating his fiduciary. Might even face, civil charges, right? But so they create these entities that then immediately start down this pathway of continued growth and increased efficiency and increased productivity, which essentially means more stuff, more control of resources, less people, right? It's not just like make the labor more efficient so people can, work a 40-hour work week. It's just like need less and less people. This is the whole process of using technology to bring in machines so that, right? And then ultimately, those entities, which were artificial intelligences, now try and create the ultimate artificial intelligence in which you need no people. There's a nuclear plant that's controlled by robots that generates, trillions of gigawatts to power these, giant machine learning AI centers that you don't need anybody now. Like, what are people? It seems like the whole process was a group of individuals who really didn't have much time for humans or humanity, creating entities that they then launched into the world to finish the process of no longer needing humanity. and by doing such, saving humanity. Right? I mean, giving it its ultimate, inevitable, best outcome. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
The whole process is inevitable. It's the progress. It's the path of progress.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
AI is inevitable. There's nothing we can do about it. It's progress. Can't get the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
And this narrative is itself part of a vast machine of narrative control of PR and advertising and media and entertainment. And that is completely controlled by these same entities engaged in this process.
Totally. I mean, we look at Rockefeller. I mean, I remember going to Rockefeller Chapel and the University of Chicago campus. Yeah, I grew up in Hyde Park where that university is. And I thought, oh, Rockefeller, he must be a cool dude. He must be a nice guy to build a chapel here for everybody to come together in community. And, you know, what we've come to learn is that Rockefeller instituted his method of healthcare system in this country based on pharmaceutical drugs and completely discredited a lot of wonderful health modalities that were a lot more natural that were really helping people. And we'll talk about this more as the podcast unfolds, but yeah, with the Flexner report and all types of heavy propaganda and creating did he create the AMA?
No, the AMA was a much older institution that started, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1830s. I want to say 1836, but I might be wrong. I'm not sure. But
didn't he create
Civil War?
Okay, but didn't he create the American Cancer Institute or something like that? Because his pharmaceutical, and so it was just this made up entity to say, oh yeah, we're really interested in this, but really, what was happening?
Well, and the American Cancer Institute, the AMA, the Rockefeller Foundation did really partner with the AMA in ways that really elevated it to its current status.
At
least that's I would have to take a deeper dive on that, but that's my understanding that the AMA was a more obscure, much less centrally important organization until they started partnering in kind of like the certification of medical schools that was connected to the Flexner report and the Rockefeller Foundation. But I think that does kind of point to a great example of how what appears to be philanthropic winds up being in service of the profit of the corporation that created the foundation that's supposedly doing the public good.
Yes, exactly. And like with health, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, just that, here's there's a problem, which is a legitimate problem, that there was no really centralized certification for medical schools. So it could mean anything to say that you were a doctor and had an MD, and there were, quite a few shady things, right? There was probably the system was in need of reform, So then this philanthropic thing happens where like, well, we're going to, via this foundation, we're going to create some medical schools, and we're going to give a bunch of money to certain medical schools like Johns Hopkins, Columbia, that are still obviously incredibly central to our health system. The cost of that is that the foundation that's giving the money insists on having a majority of board members on this institution. So from that point forward, it's going to be at the very least heavily influenced, if not completely under the dominion of the foundation, which is itself under the dominion of the corporation.
That's right.
That's doing these public works to for philanthropic reasons, right?
Yes.
But of course and then they push a version of medical care, allopathic medicine and pharmaceutical medicine based on petrochemicals, the main resource of the corporation that's doing the work.
Yes,
right?
yeah, Rockefeller.
And Bill Gates, of course, using the same playbook completely.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And so, we see our healthcare system that it's centered generally around profit. And, if you want to get people well, that's bad for business. Rather to have people dependent on one sort of pharmaceutical drug or another, rather than really giving them the tools to be truly healthy and generate an authentic sense of wellness and balance. No, just take this drug and then take this other drug, and then you'll need a drug because this one other drug has side effects, so that you're going to have to take this other drug and maybe take a couple more. And it's just cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching at the expense of the American people. And, my brush with healthcare definitely opened my eyes to all of that. And it's just crazy. And once we start peeling back the layers of this structure, you start realizing what's going on. And there are different ways to go about that. But what's great is that when your eyes are opened, you actually can navigate in a lot more empowered way, at the very least for yourself and your family. At least you have more information. But it's kind of like taking that, what was it, the red pill or the blue pill in the Matrix? It's one of those pills where he saw everything. And I think as the red pill is just like, now I see this. And before that, you don't really realize. And that's, we can map that same type of situation to the left-right political spectrum. Now that we are looking at it from a broader view, yes, there's a huge difference between the left and the right in this country in a lot of ways, for sure. However, if you notice that they're part of a mechanism, that they're working in a way that actually allows these corporate entities to maintain control, and actually they've increased their control in this country tremendously as time has gone on, because they're basically controlling Congress in ways that the general public has no clue about.
Yeah, I mean, once you start to see that corporations and once you start to see, this is still an open question, but following this hypothesis, this like working hypothesis that, for reasons that we go into in other episodes, the left and the right as a stable political entity that in reality represent some kind of philosophical cleavage of the world into two discernible camps is just kind of mythological. Like it doesn't really exist as a stable thing over time. Mm-hmm. You're left initially with kind of like a more confusing landscape, right? Because I mean, this is any time that you kind of take off a distorting lens or you remove like a top layer of something, there's this like, well, what the hell is all this? Like, what's underneath this? And of course you have to be too careful about deciding what that is, or you can fall into the next kind of distorting lens, and that's never going to really stop as a process, right? Mm-hmm. But like once you see that, okay, there is this evolution of these virtual beings, these artificial intelligences that have played a larger and larger role in our system, and acquire more and more resources and insert themselves into more and more aspects of sort of human interaction and kind of take them over, and turn them into profit generation, then it becomes easier to see the value of a binary political system that divides people into opposing camps as a functional way to kind of like prevent the pesky masses from creating problems. It's like, give them somebody to blame, keep them, prevent them from being unified, prevent solidarity movements, focus on individuals so that you don't have to worry about systemic change.
Right.
You just like a constant parade of bad apple arguments. It's about this bad man. It's about that bad woman. Get rid of them. Even, people who are beginning down this path can fall into that with, the Rothschilds or something, which is not to deny the Rothschilds or that their family has these various connections or, of course there's going to be families that have more of a connection to something than another, but it's like
them in particular. Yes, for sure.
Them in particular, maybe.
Yeah.
But I still, even if you see those patterns and those things happening, the real threat is to looking at the non-human entities themselves.
Right. Yes.
That's what has to be prevented at all cost. Like that's the ultimate camouflage.
Well, it's interesting as you were just talking, it reminded me how not only is this so obvious now that, going through a transformation where you are, both of us are now free from this tribal identity, at least to whatever extent we are. And it allows us to see issue by issue by issue and hear people in a lot more productive ways, I would argue, obviously. However, the government of this country is also acutely aware that if people actually start talking to each other in real ways, such as with what Fred Hampton did with the Black Panthers as a young man, he was creating a true rainbow coalition of poor people amongst different races and races, like poor white people who are embracing the Confederate flag, and unifying them with poor Black people and poor Latino people. And there was this government program called COINTELPRO, which the Rhythm of Life podcast that I produce and host, we went into this and how he was basically assassinated by the United States government because they didn't want that. And this is just another example of that, in which this left-right political
King. You could argue that with King as well.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. King, Malcolm X, a whole bunch of folks were on that list, and
really all assassinated at the point in their political path where they were beginning to make the kinds of solidarity movements that you're talking about.
Yeah, creating coalitions amongst people, and that's dangerous for the power base, because the left-right political spectrum, with this tribal identity becoming part of your overall identity, it's very hard to look at issues just issue by issue when you're steeped in this perspective. And when you're not steeped in the perspective, you can hear people. You may not agree with them on other issues, but what's really interesting is I'm a lot less triggered, and I'm not so I don't naturally vilify different people from different political persuasions. It's very, very interesting how this has taken shape in my own life personally, and I think to some degree in yours as well. And And I've heard so many people talk about this break from this tribal identity, and they start getting clear about things, really clear about the things that are most important to them, as opposed to getting into this very strange, it's almost like a perpetual circle that you get into, continuing to complain about the same type of things or the same bad people or what have you, but nothing ever changes. And oftentimes people are wondering why. Well, we're hopefully going to shed some light as to why that is happening. And so when you're able to look at issue by issue, and this lens is now off you, there are no more of these blinders. Yeah, it's easy to fall prey to another set of philosophies. So, you've got to have some discipline and have a structure in place where you can talk to people and have them, give you some feedback like you and I are doing all the time. We're talking about different issues. We don't pretend to know it all. Quite the opposite. We're have a lot of humility and humble, but we're not nearly as quick to judge somebody that just from who they are, or what political party they're affiliated with, or what religion they are. It's quite the opposite. It's way more of a humane view from what, for lack of a better description.
I mean, there are times that I feel now that a corporation as an entity is a kind of a parasite. And it's sort of hacking, just functionally, like analyzing it. If it's a living being, it is a living, I don't know. I mean, it's like it is composed of living beings, but it outlives them.
It's organic. It's evolving. And
it's organic.
And taking shape and ebbing and flowing.
It feels like a parasite, and it feels like what it has, or like a virus, I suppose, that has hacked our evolutionary code. In that, like if you think about tribalism from an evolutionary standpoint, if you have a group that if you encounter them, there's almost certainly going to be violence, and you're not going to reproduce, and you're not going to be in the gene pool, and, your traits aren't going to be represented. It's like, it becomes very important to recognize sort of tribalistic tells, like very quickly, right? Which, in a country, like maybe you're in a country like Iraq, or, someplace where there's like a Sunni Shiite civil war happening on some level, a hot one or a cold one. And it's the same thing of like, you have to be able to recognize like who's part of what group, like really, really quickly, and that's kind of understandable in a way from like an evolutionary standpoint. But then you can see that as something that can be hacked by a system that, if they can get you scared of each other enough, they can get you to react. And when I say they, I guess I mean whatever entities are in charge of the control of our public relations and mediascape on a corporate level. Which, I mean, and there's cracks in that, of course, like podcasts, and, it's sort of this kind of fight that's happening, right?
Yes, for sure.
But, like once you've made people frightened enough, then very small talisman that are not really related to much of anything might have like huge significance. Like someone's wearing a certain hat or a certain kind of clothing, or, says a certain few words, and people don't even necessarily know what those words signify in a deep sense. but they know that they're going to trigger that response, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes people so much easier to program. It makes them so much easier to like predict and manipulate.
Totally.
You know, it's like, you know, you can be like, Ukraine flag, you know, red hat. And it's like, yeah, you know, and at that point it's much easier to work with that raw material as a shaper of the public mind, as a manipulator of public narrative.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do think that, and it doesn't have to be in like a room of people conspiratorially. It's like all the natural incentives are going to drive the system towards supporting aspects of culture that further that, you know, and everyone's just kind of playing their role. It's like everybody's playing their part in the big parasite.
Yeah,
You know?
particularly the big media outlets. I mean, you know what, you know, a lot of people may recognize is that if you turn on any of the major news stations, MSNBC, CNN, or Fox, you know, during the news or even during a ball game, you know, I'm watching the World Series on Fox 32, WFLD, and every commercial is a pharmaceutical ad, at least one or two or three, every commercial break. And, you know, they don't need to sell any more pharmaceutical products through those commercials on television, even though it probably helps. What they're ultimately doing, what a lot of people probably don't realize, is they're controlling the narrative. You don't see a lot of those, a lot of news outlets doing reporting on things of pharmaceutical products harming people, even though they do all the time. The products themselves do harm people. And, you know, you can tell that they harm people by if you watch the commercials, all the side effects that they have to list legally are crazy. Like you might be, you know, you might be bleeding from your eyes. You might lose a finger. I mean, it's crazy. So I'm almost not exaggerating how bad these side effects are if you actually listen to them. But while you're listening to them, you're watching these beautiful scenes of these lovely, happy people with this beautiful photography. And the music is so uplifting and inspiring. Meanwhile, you might die from the side effects, but, you know, your blood pressure will be down or your eczema might get a little bit better, but you might just drop dead. And so, like, they just are, you know, they pour millions of dollars into these news outlets to shape the narrative. And that's really what corporations do through the process of PR, or otherwise known as propaganda. And there's very, very, very highly skilled companies that know how to do this extremely well. And if you're not clued into it, it's like you'll believe that the food pyramid that we were told was really healthy is healthy for us. But then if you do some research, you realize, oh, that was co-opted by corporate interests and all that crap. And, you know, almost all of the time when you look at any of these types of structures in place, let's see, what was corporate influence like, and what did they have to do with this? And it's driving the profit incentive. So if you look at, getting back to your point about corporations as a parasite to some, as a parasite on society, it's always good when I ever analyze anything, any structure or any environment or any construct, I look at what are the incentive structures and what is that fundamental structure and objective of this person or this entity or whatever it is. And the fundamental objective of a corporation is to maximize profit. Now, if that wasn't if you have an employee-owned company, that's very different. It's not always about profit. It's about taking care of the people involved and giving them a living wage and all that. So it's very different. but structurally from the bottom up, you can see that the incentive structures are very harmful to people that, the general public oftentimes. You know what I mean?
I do. and I can, to some extent, I can hear some of the counter arguments that no doubt people are thinking, which is good, to have counter arguments. Like,
for sure.
One is, do we benefit from these systems? Well, of course we do, in the sense that, first of all, we can't survive without them,
Right.
But even this is the thing that I think is kind of key. Even if we think, this has brought us so many good things, because I'm not even really trying to make the argument that, there is some much better way necessarily.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm not even really parasites are not inherently evil. I mean, it's like, I don't know, by mass, how much of life is actually parasitic in form. You could argue that we're parasitic over other.
Totally.
This is an aspect of,
Absolutely.
So it's
a matter of perspective, for sure.
I very much don't feel sort of like the evil corporations, even though certainly we can look at actions that are being taken that feel evil.
Yeah, for sure. Sure.
It's more like just understanding at a mechanistic level, at best I can, how that incentive structure is operating. And it seems like even if you think that, let's take the pharmaceutical industry just as one example, because it could be any profitable industry, right? Like, imagine that, any industry that, whatever economic sector, has the highest profit margins, has the most dispendable income to invest in things like media and advertising, which are kind of an investment in narrative, right? That's what you hire an advertising firm for. It's what you hire a risk management form. It's like, how do you invest money in such a way that influences the narrative to achieve your goals and insulate yourself from risk and all this, very non-conspiratorial. It's just what is done,
Totally.
If you assume that, but it all works out for the best because we get these things that benefit us, and we live longer or healthier or whatever it is. It's like, if that is true, but it's also true that the system is just trying to generate profit, then whatever is keeping that in line with some kind of progress of public good, even if it currently exists, what could possibly prevent it from just going off the rails? In theory, that would be regulation from a state. Right. But this is the other piece of the puzzle that I think starts to be explicated by the gospel of wealth and the history that follows it, that the state and the regulatory agencies were created by those entities for their own good.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And leaned on and affected by and influenced by. We saw this in the financial crisis, where all the rating agencies were given these crap investment bonds, AAA ratings in 2007, and they were full of crap. And because there was pressure put on them to do so, and because people were making obscene amounts of money from really horrible mortgages that were extremely risky. And then the government allowed the leverage of banks to be ridiculously high, where they had to leave very little reserves in their bank. And it was just one thing led to another. And the regulatory structure was really compromised in a big way. And we see this with food. I couldn't help but to think of the whole food industry, which, like, on its surface, like, we create a lot of food in this country and we have these massive farms. And you'd think on its surface, like, isn't that good? We want to feed people. We can feed a lot more people with less people involved, better machinery, better technology. We can harvest grain from a field with these humongous tractors or whatever. I don't know what the name is. Those huge machines that can go do their thing on a humongous level. And we can slaughter animals and raise chickens and then slaughter them in a very mechanistic, grand scale, and feed a lot more people. But then you start looking at what's actually happening is the incentive structures are so strong for profit that the food industry has a tremendous incentive to not really care about quality. And so now we look at around today and we have an epidemic of chronic illness in this country. And it's pretty obvious that food has something to do with it. And, you know, as a father of 2 children, and you're a father as well, you know, most of the stuff on a grocery shelf is not real food. And, you know, my view of food is if it's organic, at least you can call it food for the most part. And a lot of it's just straight up poison.
You mean organic from a biological standpoint, not a...
Yes, but and also even the labeling. Yeah, even the labeling of organic has been compromised to a degree. But, you know, at least that's a standard that's like somewhat, you know, that you're moving in a decent direction. But that there's just a tremendous amount of processed food because it's cheaper and you can alter it. And the regulatory structures have been compromised. You know, there are companies that make the same, well, quote unquote, the same product in other industrialized nations versus what they sell here. And the version that they sell here is a lot more harmful to human beings that are consuming it than the other version in other countries. A lot of people don't even realize that because of our lack of regulations. And why does that happen? Because corporations have an outsized influence on the legislative process and through lobbying, and they have the money to do so. So corporations are able to galvanize this tremendous amount of power and to affect society in a way that fulfills their agenda of the profit motive. You can, you know, when push comes to shove and you peel back the onion, you realize, oh, that's really what this is about. And and that's why a lot of corporations will buy up food companies, for instance, that are actually putting out some decent stuff. But then, you know, the major corporation like a Nestle buys some sort of a natural food maker and they just sell it themselves and they just alter it a little bit, make it a little bit more efficient, let it make, you know, eke out a little bit more profit. So what I'm saying is, yes, corporations can create efficiencies that on its surface seem to be very positive and could have really positive effects for society. But at their fundamental objective with the profit motive, it usually leads to really harmful effects on society, unfortunately.
I mean, another way of looking at it is that these entities are programmed to grow uncontrollably, right?
Totally.
And in order for them to grow, they do still need people, right? So they need more people. They need people to consume the things that they produce, the services they consume people, they feed on people, they feed people. We are domesticated by them. And you can sort of see that there is a kind of a crude incentive to like increase the population and maybe even increase lifespan broadly speaking, in the sense of like a customer persisting for longer is profitable.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, absolutely.
You like if there's sliders and one of them is like customer lifespan, I suppose increasing that slider, like profit goes up, and it all comes back to that. Right. But
sure.
The assumption, and that may be true, and certainly we're living longer, and there's obviously, if I break my arm, I'm going to the ER and they'll put me in the fancy X-ray machine or an MRI or whatever, and I'll avail myself of all the technology. And
right.
Isn't that hypocritical? And I don't think it is, because there's not a claim that these things are not good, or that we should go back to something. It's not a Luddite argument to return to some prior state. I mean, it could be that this evolution is inevitable. It could be that it happens over and over. It could be that it's a cycle. It could be that it's a feedback loop. It could be that it's a simulation. I don't know. It's really just the process of like, if we open the hood, what the hell is going on?
Yes.
Like, there's stuff whirring around and doing stuff and interacting, and this is hitting off that thing. And you kind of look at it, and, what makes it complicated is that there's also all this like sales pitch. It's like we're trying to understand what the car is by looking at car commercials, and car commercials don't tell you how cars work. Car commercials tell you how human psychology works.
Yeah. Oh, and totally.
Right. So that's what I feel, and maybe that's what we're trying to encourage. At least I'm trying to encourage in myself, is to look under the hood.
Yes.
Without worrying about what the car commercial says cars are.
Yes. Oh, totally.
Because
man.
I know that there's some very highly paid people who want to convince me what cars are and what they have to do with my sexuality and my social status, and how cool I am, and
very cool. I'm gonna be slicking back my hair when I buy that new car for sure, with what little hair I have. But yeah, no, totally. And it reminds me of the two documentaries that I loved: Food Inc., which pulled back the veil on the food industry in this country by two wonderful journalists. I can't, their names escape me at the moment, but, and it was a wonderful documentary about, hey, have you ever really thought about where your food comes from? And most people really don't. Where does a piece of meat come from, and who controls it? And you start realizing through the documentary that the whole food industry is controlled by very few entities, and they've got a lock on things. And so much so that if you speak out against, say, the meat industry, that's what happened to Oprah. She got sued, and she was in litigation for a while, but she's got a lot of financial resources where she could defend herself. But if she couldn't, she could have gone to prison. I mean, it's really, really intense. And then another documentary that I loved was Inside Job, which was a really wonderful documentary that I believe it won an Academy Award on the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, and with mortgage-backed securities and collateral debt obligations. And you really see just how ridiculous this scenario was, where people were just making obnoxious amounts of money, giving out these very, very risky loans, and there was no accountability. And of course, that's going to lead to an inevitable a collapse of the housing market. But what was really fascinating about that documentary is once this started happening, and some people did see it, and they were sounding the alarm. They were sounding the alarm really heavily. Nobody wanted to listen. Even people, very, very, very well-educated people, were like, are you kidding me? The housing market is going to collapse? No way. Are you kidding? It's always, real estate has always gone up in this country. That could never be. Well, it could never be until it happens. And it happened. And millions of people lost their homes. And we were that close to going into a depression, right as the reins of power were transferred from George W. Bush to Obama. And then, of course, who went to jail from some of these banks? No, nobody. As a matter of fact, a lot of people that were in the financial industry profited tremendously, obscenely. It was crazy, particularly the one company that you see people going in and out of the federal government, Goldman Sachs, Timothy Geithner, for instance, I think he's head of the New York Federal Reserve branch. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It goes on. And we'll go into a lot of different things, like the creation of the Federal Reserve and things of this nature. And we'll go heavy into propaganda and PR and the role of it on behalf of corporations and governments, and the relationship between government power and corporate power, particularly in this country. So it's going to be a really interesting ride, and I'm really excited to get into it. And this is just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, I think our next landing point is I don't know. I'm of two minds of whether to keep it completely chronological. I think I want to go with the Center for Public Information as the next sort of stop on this train, because it represents the first really true propaganda partnership between that kind of corporate entity that's created in the time period that we're talking about, the late 1880s, 1890s, and the full embrace of kind of the new electronic technology of propaganda and the new psychological technology of psychoanalysis and Freudian and Jungian theory of not just the individual mind, but of the collective consciousness of the mob mentality, So, excited to continue the conversation.
That's
on
great.
Too, so
that's terrific. Well, we can wrap it up here for the moment, Mr. Blake Minnerly. This has been exciting, and I hope our viewers got something from this. And stay tuned for more reflective and insightful and thoughtful conversations here on the Ambiology podcast. I'm Steve Ordower.
And I'm Blake Minnerly.
Thanks for joining us. Maybe the deeper question isn't whether these systems are good or evil, but whether we can still see them clearly while living inside of them. This conversation isn't about dividing the world into heroes or villains, or denying that technology, industry, and modern systems have transformed human civilization in profound ways, bringing advances in medicine, infrastructure, communication, convenience, and material prosperity. The question is something deeper. What happens when the systems we create begin shaping us in return? What happens when institutions built to maximize growth and profit become powerful enough to influence culture, politics, medicine, and media, and even the way we perceive one another? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when we stop seeing those systems clearly because we've become so immersed inside them? As the mathematician, philosopher, and consequential intellectual Kurt Gödel demonstrated in 1931 through his incompleteness theorems, every sufficiently complex system contains truths it cannot fully see, understand, or explain from within itself. Let me say that again slowly. Every sufficiently complex system contains truths it cannot fully see, understand, or explain from within itself. As we continue this journey on Ambiology, we're not asking you what to think. We're asking you to step outside of this framework and look underneath the hood, to question assumptions, to examine incentives, and to explore the historical forces that helped shape the modern world we now take for granted. because these ideas didn't begin with social media or cable news or modern politics. Many of them trace back to a transformative period in American history, a period of explosive industrial expansion, unprecedented wealth accumulation, corporate consolidation, and the emergence of modern institutional power, what historians would later call the First Gilded Age. And in our next episode, we'll begin exploring that very world, the rise of oil, steel, railroads, monopolies, and the industrial empires that helped redefine America forever. And if this conversation resonated with you, please don't just listen to it in isolation. Talk about it, question it, challenge it. Share it with someone who sees the world differently than you do. Because the moment people begin thinking beyond the frameworks they've inherited, new possibilities begin to emerge. I'm Steve Ordower. This is Ambiology. Thank you so much for listening. This show was produced by me, Steve Ordower, and Blake Minnerly. The graphic artist, editor, and social media manager is Carrie Tanner. And if this conversation resonated with you, if it made you pause, question something, or see things just a little differently, make sure to follow or subscribe to the show so you don't miss what's coming next. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, someone who's been thinking about these same questions, share this episode with them, because this isn't just something to listen to, it's something to talk about. Please be sure to drop us a like and follow us on social media, where we'll be sharing clips, ideas, and continuing the conversation beyond the podcast. Your support really helps us grow this and reach more people who are ready to think a little differently. We're building this in real time, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. Subscribe, share it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. I'm Steve Ordower.
This has been a Rhythm and Light production.